About a year or so ago, I did an entire series about sensory processing disorder. I will have the playlist linked to up above for you and in the description box below so that you can check it out. But today I want to talk a little bit about different types of children who have sensory processing disorder. Hi everyone, I'm Michelle and this is A Common Life. I am a mom of 5 and I have 2 children with sensory processing disorders. Now, I think that everybody in the world has a little hint of, sensory processing issues. Maybe you are very sensitive to certain scents or tastes or touch or like feeling of clothing and things like that. There are lots of ways that we all have these sensitivities and we just learn how to cope with them and deal with them. But for some children and some adults, it is very, very difficult and it is much worse. All of the things that they feel are much deeper, much stronger, and it makes life a lot more difficult for them. So before you come here to judge and blame and things like that, please pause before you say anything and consider that you may not understand how they're feeling because you are not walking in their shoes. They are feeling things very intensely, more so than any of us who are more neurotypical can understand. And so please give them grace. And if you want to say anything negative, please just take it somewhere else. This is not the place for it. Thank you. Today I want to talk about hyposensitive versus hypersensitive kids. Now, children with sensory processing disorder a lot of times are either hypersensitive or hyposensitive. But in some cases, children are a mix of both, kind of depending on the stimuli. Hypersensitive children are extremely reactive to stimuli, so they feel it very profoundly and very strongly, and sometimes it's painful for them or just very uncomfortable. They may be unable to tolerate bright lights or loud sounds or itchy clothing or food of certain textures or tastes or things like that. Now, some children are sensitive and they feel these same types of things. But for children with a sensory processing disorder, it's even a level higher than that. It's even more difficult, more uncomfortable, more disgusting, or feels more terrible than it does for people who are just kind of generally sensitive. When it comes to wearing clothing, things can be too tight or too loose or too itchy. A lot of times they will want their labels cut out of their clothing, or they may only want to wear tight clothing, or they may only want to wear loose clothing. It kind of just depends on the person. But something as simple as just wearing clothing can be very difficult for someone with a sensory processing disorder. They may also be fearful of sudden movements or touches, like if someone suddenly jumps over and hugs them or kisses them or tickles them or things like that. It may be just a little bit harder for them. Other people, it might startle them or scare them, but then they can laugh and be happy. But for a child with a sensory processing disorder who is hypersensitive, those things are much more difficult, and sometimes they can even feel pain because of them. Another thing with children who are hypersensitive is that they have issues with proprioception. Now, proprioception is just basically the ability to know where your body is. And some children just really struggle to have an idea of where their body is within a certain space. Maybe they get too close to you and talk all right up in your face. Or maybe they feel like you are too close to them and they want to back up and have more space. And they just kind of have a hard time navigating what space their own body takes up. This can make it very difficult for them because they bump into things or they trip or things like that. And that has to do with that proprioception. It makes things very difficult for them to just even walk down the street, or especially be in a crowd of people. They can feel very, very claustrophobic because of that. They may also have trouble sensing their actual motions in their body. So they may, if they're erasing something, they may push too hard and actually put a hole in the paper. Or if they're turning a page, they may rip the page because they just don't really understand how strong their muscles are or things like that. So even for those normal day-to-day things that you and I may think nothing about, they struggle with them because it is just slightly more difficult. Now, on the opposite, hyposensitive kids are not sensitive. They are not bothered by all of these things that I listed that the hypersensitive kids are challenged by. They are typically the ones that people call sensory seekers. They are the ones that want to be touching things, want to be squeezed, want to rub things that are soft. They kind of always like to have their hands on something. They also do not understand personal space. And maybe because of this seeking this sensory input, they will come close to you and want to touch you and be near you and things like that. And they don't realize that it may not be age appropriate anymore. They aren't able to see those types of things. They may also have an extremely high tolerance for pain or discomfort, or they may not even know their own strength. And they may be playing and they may take things too far and be too rough without realizing that they're even being rough. So it may seem like malicious or of bad intent from someone on the outside, but they're really just trying to have fun and play, and they don't realize their own, body and their own strength, and it kind of gets them into some bad situations. These type of children love jumping and bouncing and moving and running and getting tight squeezes and things like that, or hard high fives. They love that sensory input. It makes them feel really, really good. So they may seem like hyperactive or something like that to someone on the outside, but they're really just craving these types of stimuli. They want all of the input as much as they can possibly get, and it actually helps to regulate them and calm them down. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, some children can be hypo and hypersensitive depending on, what their sensory input needs are. So I have some children who kind of go back and forth between the two. I have a son who hates being in a crowd and sometimes doesn't even like being hugged and doesn't like loud noises. But then he is also hypersensitive in the way, he's also hyposensitive in the way that he needs to jump on a trampoline and run and things like that. And it helps to regulate him. When he has had a very grueling session in school or something like that, rather than like sitting on the couch and vegging out, the thing that helps him feel better is to jump on the trampoline and run around and just get that energy out. That is what makes him feel the best. So he kind of goes back and forth between the two. Then I have one child who tends to be just more on the hypersensitive side. Everything for him is difficult and loud and hard, and he feels pain so much more profoundly than you or I ever would. And so for him, very, very simple things are very difficult. They are draining for him and they wear him out. And he does not seek any of those things that a hyposensitive person would seek. He doesn't want to be tightly hugged or, jumping on the trampoline or doing things like that or being thrown in the air. He doesn't like that. It would tense him up. And so sometimes I just have to get him out there and let him, play and express himself, but he's never going to necessarily seek those things for himself to kind of self-regulate. Now, when I say self-regulate, I mean basically when you are able to respond to the things that are going on around you in a way that is socially or developmentally age appropriate. For someone with a sensory processing disorder, a lot of the times they're unable to do that. That's why you will see a child who is 8 or 10 years old having a meltdown, and that's because they have not been able to regulate themselves in a way that has helped them to calm down. And the only thing that they can do is just lose it, basically. And that's really, really hard on them, and it really wears them out. So for children who are hypersensitive or children who are hyposensitive, they have different needs. So the hyposensitive child will need to use that physical activity. If he's gone through something that was difficult, or if he had a really busy day or something like that, rather than forcing him to go lay down and take a nap, maybe have him go jump on his trampoline for 10 minutes or ride his bike or give him a nice tight squeeze or get him a weighted blanket or something like that. Those are the types of things that can help him to self-regulate when he is kind of unable to do those things all on his own. One of the best ways to determine whether or not your child needs self-regulation techniques, which you can find online, you can basically just Google self-regulating techniques and you can find so many options out there based on whether or not your child is hypersensitive or hyposensitive. One of the best ways to kind of understand that is to watch your child throughout the day and see what type of triggers will cause them to melt down. Because typically, either for a hypersensitive or a hyposensitive child, it ends up with a meltdown. That is the point at which they have kind of reached their limit and have not self-regulated and have not figured out how to calm themselves down. And the only thing that they can do is just let it all go. And so to avoid meltdowns, what you need to do is find the types of things that trigger that child, and I wouldn't always say to avoid them, but just figure out how to help your child in that situation. That way, when they're on their own and they're encountering these types of things, they know what to do. You give them the tools to prepare them. Now, I'm not going into detail about that in this video. I basically just wanted to talk about hypersensitive versus hyposensitive children and what the differences are and how we can kind of be a combination of both sometimes. So if you would like to hear more about that, please like this video and comment below, and I can make more videos in the future all about self-regulation and things like that. I do have a video that is all about transitions and children who struggle with transitioning from one thing to another. So if you would like to see that, I will have it linked to you up above and in the description box so that you can check it out. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below, and please don't forget to subscribe. Have a great day.